In 2009, Sega released the Platinum Games developed Bayonetta, a roaming beat-em-up from the legendary and somewhat controversial game designer Hideki Kamiya, in the vein of his earlier work Devil May Cry. In the midst of a 4-game publishing deal between Sega and Platinum, would Bayonetta deliver the critical and commercial success that both companies craved? Join me, Dan the Mega Driver of the Sega guys, as I look back on one of my favourite games of the PS360 generation and one of the finest action games of all time, Bayonetta. Bayonetta is an arse-kicking, gun-toting, wall-running action extravaganza as the game's titular witch battles the forces of heaven in one of the most off-the-wall, bombastic and enjoyable games of its era. This sort of borderline nonsensical action epic would only come from the mind of Hideki Kamiya, the outspoken genius behind Okami, Beautiful Joe, Resident Evil 2 and of course Devil May Cry. Hideki had reportedly been working on his next project since 2007, following the release of Okami, the closure of Clover Studios by Capcom, and the creation of his new company Seeds Inc. in 2006, which would then be merged with Tatsuya Minami's Odd Inc. in 2007 to create the new company Platinum Games. With not only Kamiya and Minami, but also Atsushi Inaba and Shinji Mikami, the newly formed Platinum Games had an enviable amount of ex-Capcom talent and an abundance of daring game ideas. All they needed now was a publisher. And thus, up stepped Sega. With Sega's own efforts in that generation on the Wii, Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, so far to that point having somewhat mixed results, the opportunity to work with a company of the pedigree of Platinum must have seemed like a no-brainer. The first game by Atsushi Inaba was Mad World on the Nintendo Wii. This brutal, stylish hack-and-slash action affair was well received by the gaming media, though unfortunately it didn't deliver commercially. Probably something to do with the Wii's balance board riding casual user base. As a result, Sega cancelled any Wii game that's had mature content. Yes, that's how badly Mad World bombed. The next Platinum game published by Sega was Infinite Space on the Nintendo DS. Remember that? No, neither did I, and given that there's just 2 mainstream critic reviews and some of the most generic Western anime box art that I've ever seen, it won't surprise you to learn that this too failed to sell. And so, the hopes of Platinum and Sega's relationship rested on the shoulders of Shinji Mikami's Vanquish, oh, we'll get to this gem soon enough, and Hideki Kamiya's Bayonetta. It would be Bayonetta that would be scheduled to launch first, Kamiya returning to the beat-em-up action game subgenre he created back in 2001 with Devil May Cry. It was Yasuke Hashimoto who suggested that Kamiya deliver yet another of his 3D action games, and with 8 years between the release of that game and Bayonetta, Kamiya recognised that this type of game had progressed in that time, with several other games similar or taking direct influence from Devil May Cry, such as God of War, Ninja Gaiden and many more. Kamiya then was keen to rip up the rulebook and shake this new genre to its very foundations. There are 2 core pillars that make Bayonetta stand out amongst other games of its ilk. The first is Bayonetta herself. Kamiya has spoken a number of times on the first game's themes of sexiness and femininity. There may be some unhinged individuals who claim the game is sexist and out of touch, but Bayonetta's unique approach at the time compared to other female-led games was quite a bold approach for the genre. Bayonetta was actually painstakingly designed. The beehive hairdo, for instance, stands in for a traditional witch's hat in terms of its shape. Her glasses were insisted upon by Kamiya to differentiate her and give her a sense of mystery and intelligence. Her long limbs were in stark contrast to other female characters in games of that era, which also applies to her proportions, some not exaggerated and others more so, given that her official height is around 8 feet tall. Her black garb would be made from her hair and would serve as a sort of merging of those 2 aspects of fashion, whilst also serving to highlight her do as the source of her power. Mari Shimazaki was the key designer for the character, and one of her favourite aspects of Bayonetta's design was how, during certain attacks, Bayonetta's hair would detach itself from our heroine to create gigantic woven appendages and beasts, leaving Bayonetta herself somewhat bare. Still, those sequences are designed to hide the protagonist's modesty, as, according to Kamiya, being mysterious was more attractive than bearing it all. It may seem strange to spend this much of the video on the character design, but you can't talk about the game Bayonetta without the character Bayonetta, because the lady herself went through over a year of designing and redesigning to get her just right. And I've got to be honest, they succeeded in every respect.
Let's rock, baby!
There are very few female protagonists as iconic as Bayonetta. She remains as beloved today as she did 15 years ago, and with good reason. Yes, 15 years ago as of 2025, the making of this video, since the game arrived on both the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 on October the 29th in Japan, and would come to the West 2 months later on January the 5th in the USA and the 8th of January in Europe. Personally, I had the game pre-ordered following some fairly extensive coverage in the UK games magazines at the time. The question then is twofold. Firstly, did the experience live up to the hype? And secondly, is the game deserving of its reputation both in terms of its legacy and of course its famous protagonist? This right here is my original Xbox 360 copy of Bayonetta, and that's what I've been using for the purposes of this video, albeit played through my Xbox One X for convenience. While it's played on the newer console, there's no enhancements here, so it will be pretty much exactly as it was on the Xbox 360 back in the day. The game itself starts with an action sequence backed by an opening narration, which sets the background for the game's story. In what is probably a great piece of unintentional expectation setting, the dialogue around the Lumen Sages and the Umbral Witches and their role as overseers of the world and the fall of both sides comes off as almost impenetrable babble when it's juxtaposed against the sheer batshit crazy action that ensues on screen. You can't fail this section and you can't die, and with two witches on screen battling hordes of increasingly powerful foes, it's a great taste of the over-the-top action yet to come. From there, we jump forward into a funeral for someone called Eggman the Destroyer. But before you're able to ask the question that you're asking yourself right now, the minister discards her attire to reveal that it was Bayonetta all along, luring the forces of Paradiso, who are essentially angels from heaven, into battle. It serves to underline the game's balance between the sublime and the ridiculous, as the game's Joe Pesci lookalike utters "forget about it" shortly before Bayonetta's friend slash arms dealer is tossing innumerable guns at our heroine so she can continue her heavenly massacre. And what is immediately apparent is just how accessible yet deep Bayonetta's gameplay is. The opening section will tell you how to punch, kick and shoot, but the game feeds you new actions at what is probably the best pace I've seen in a game. Rarely do you feel under-equipped, yet new abilities seem to come at just the right time, with minimal exposition making them feel welcome rather than intrusive. Doom the Dark Ages, as great as it is, should take note. You get what is perhaps Bayonetta's most important ability early on, the ability to use Witch Time. And it is within Witch Time, with the options that it opens up in gameplay, that establishes the second core pillar upon which the game Bayonetta is built, and thus what makes it special. As you battle through the game, you'll find that enemies won't succumb to your normal attacks and that you're getting overwhelmed by the bedlam on screen. Witch Time is the mechanic initiated by perfect dodging an enemy attack, causing them to just miss, triggers the effect and slows the action down. This allows Bayonetta to rack up a big attack or combo or damage enemies and bosses that previously had some form of protection from her attacks. Nothing is more satisfying than hitting that perfect dodge and seeing the purple hue take over the screen, then wailing on your enemies. It doesn't solve every challenge, more on that later, but a huge part of the game is memorising those enemy attack patterns and knowing when to hit that dodge button. And of course, to maximise your damage, you'll need to use your combos. You can mash buttons to kick and punch, but ultimately what you need is for Bayonetta to end her combo with one of her magic attacks. These wicked weave attacks usually involve Bayonetta projecting a giant fist or foot to end the chain, which causes huge damage. As we said previously, these end of combo magic attacks are all made of Bayonetta's hair, with her wicked weave forming those giant appendages or perhaps more. You see, while certain magic attacks are enacted in combos, there's also boss finishes that use Bayonetta's hair as she morphs it into various beasts and contraptions, from six-eyed giant crows to dragons to finish off her foes in spectacular fashion. You'll learn a lot of the moves as you go, with some abilities like Bayonetta's animal forms that get specific but refreshingly brief prompt-based tutorials, and that also applies to skills that you buy too. For the rest of the moves, however, it's a case of self-discovery as you pull combos together to see what works. It's not all blind button tapping though. The loading screens let you try out Bayonetta's extensive moveset with prompts on the right hand side of the screen. And yes, I said you can buy skills too. Rodan's Gates of Hell shop lets our favourite witch purchase new moves, weapons and items in exchange for halos, which are the game's currency. Now the halos, they can be obtained several ways. Defeated enemies drop halos, and you'll get a reward based on how well you clear a section, as well as your rank on the chapter as a whole. Your ranks are based on how quickly you clear areas, how much damage you take and so on, and you're ranked from platinum, gold, silver and bronze all the way down to steel, each of them with their own character to represent them. The ranking obviously increases playability, as the push is there to improve your score, and the richest items in Rodan's shop cannot be bought all in one go around, so even when you've rolled the credits on the game, you'll likely need or even want to do it over again. Now, those halos, they look a bit like rings, don't they? Well, surely that's no accident. This is a Sega published game after all, and Bayonetta is chock full of Sega references. Whether it's clips from Afterburner and Fantasy Zone playing before the Angel Attack bonus minigame, or Splash Wave playing through Chapter 8's motorcycle chase, or even the full-on Space Harrier minigame at Chapter 14, there's no shortage of Sega references in here. They range from the overt to the subtle, from the enemies Grace and Glory being named after the same tune in Jet Set Radio, to the motorcycle control scheme that uses layouts and the font from Sega's arcade classic Hang On, right down to the dialogue itself, like Jean shouting disappear when she attacks, much like Shadow does in Sonic Adventure 2, whereby this witch versus witch battle evokes that same hedgehog versus hedgehog battle in that game. The Eggman the Destroyer reference? Well, that seems pretty on the nose, doesn't it? But Hideki Kamiya himself says it was just a random name he used by accident, not knowing that it was actually the name of another famous character in another series. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. Maybe it was because he'd fallen out with Sega. I think we need Carl Pilkington to weigh in on this one.
Bullshit.
Anyway, great action, abundant Sega references, plus loads of other references to other series, especially Capcom ones.
Hey, check this out. What are you buying?
You have a deep and rewarding gameplay loop, tons of replayability. Sounds perfect, right? Well, it is, and it isn't. The game does have its issues. The story is complete nonsense, to be fair. It's hard to get truly invested in the stakes when everything feels so abstract. There's some amazing characters in here on the protagonist side. You can't help but laugh at characters like Luca and Enzo, appreciate badasses like Rodan and Jean, and empathise with little Cereza, and of course there's Bayonetta herself. But as far as antagonists are concerned, it's pretty weak, with the final reveal being kind of underwhelming and filled with nonsensical exposition.
But it's all diarrhea of the mouth if you ask me.
Most of the game is peerless though. There's some sections that are frustrating, such as when you battle Gracious and Glorious, souped up versions of Grace and Glory where you can't even use Witch Time. The most frustrating parts all come from when the game is trying to mix things up, removing Witch Time for example, or making you fight a boss using a turret. But when Bayonetta sticks to what is good, oh, there is nothing else like it. It is still one of the most spectacular of spectacle fighters ever made, and all of this from an Xbox 360 game. Yes, the original game may run at 720p, but it ran at a close to locked 60 frames per second. Despite that high frame rate, the game and the art style are still splendid to behold. Now, this is the version of the game that I started with and that I regularly return to. It is available on the Wii U, Switch, PS3 and PS4, Xbox One and PC. Suffice to say, there are plenty of ways to play Bayonetta. Just don't play it on the PlayStation 3. The game often runs at below 30 frames per second and is something of a disaster for that platform. On everything else, it runs fine. I've not been able to play them all myself, but some experts on Reddit suggest that the 360 version played on a modern Xbox is the best way to go. But the Switch, PC and native ports to both the PS4 and Xbox One are all fine, despite varying instances of inaccurate colours, lag, bugs and compressed audio. Bottom line, if you have a console or PC to play Bayonetta on, you should experience this masterpiece if you haven't already. Because yes, it is a masterpiece. The game reviewed astronomically well on release, even garnering a perfect score in Famitsu. Throughout the 10-hour campaign, I was grinning like a Cheshire cat for the most part. Those sections I mentioned did annoy me a little, but that's honestly probably a skill issue, and maybe newcomers should start on the easy modes rather than starting on normal like I did. Bayonetta then is a game that oozes style and charm. It's the perfect blend of Platinum Games' off-the-wall, hyper-polished action pedigree and Sega's own charm. Sega lent hard into Bayonetta on release, promoting it heavily and even featuring it on its own Christmas card. Sadly, despite selling 1 million units, it just wasn't enough for Sega, and plans for a sequel were put on hold until Nintendo of all people picked up the tab for both of Bayonetta's sequels. This puts the Bayonetta IP in a weird kind of limbo. Since Platinum developed the games themselves, Nintendo published the second and third titles, but Sega ultimately owns the franchise IP. But this video isn't about the sequels, it's about the title that set the world alight in 2009 and 2010, that set a new standard for action games, that introduced one of gaming's most iconic characters. Whether it's the pitch perfect beat 'em up action, the astonishing use of witch time, the epic final attacks, the glorious visuals or the sublime soundtrack, Bayonetta is an experience to be savoured, standing as the ultimate evolution of Hideki Kamiya's Devil May Cry style video games. However you play this game, greatness surely awaits you, and if you've played it already, you know it's probably time to enjoy that ride all over again. This has been Dan the Mega Driver of the Sega Guys, and I will see you on the Sega side.